I, of course, forgot to hit the record button. So we're now going to be recording, guys, just in case anybody wants to watch the video back who couldn't make it. And if you want, again, you can ask any questions that you have of Alan in the chat. And I see there's already a couple of them. I want to talk about, we're going to focus on parental rights and education questions first, and then we can do all the other ones as well if we have time. Her question for you was, what is your stance on school choice? She said, thank you so much for your service. As a Navy veteran, I really appreciate it. She also has several veteran related questions, but they can wait until the end.
Yeah. So if you watched the debate last night, I kind of gave you a little snippet, and I've said this in another debate, but I grew up in the 80s and early 90s, along with my three brothers. All four of us were in public school. Unlike my brothers, public education wasn't meeting my needs. The large class size, I probably had what they called ADHD or ADD before we knew what it was. But anyway, I just wasn't doing well. My parents had to sacrifice to send me to a smaller Christian school that was private. It was very small, but it was smaller class size. And so they took me out of public school. My three brothers continued on and graduated from high school. They all flourished. They were all president of the student body of their public high school. I always tell people I graduated number 10 in my graduating class. Of course, there were 11 people in my graduating class, but in all seriousness, I got a really good education at that school. But what I tell people from that story is, if children growing up in the same house under the same parents, being taught the same values, have unique and individual education needs that are very distinctive to them and not their siblings, and they have to be tailored out and go to another school, then why would we expect kids growing up across the state to be any different? Every child is different. Even children growing up in a house together are going to be very different and unique. They're snowflakes, right? They all are different in how they receive information. And so I've always believed that policy in public or any education should be based on what is in the best interest of the child, which is why I support the money following the child to get them to the education that meets their needs. Now, with that being said, I also tell people part of my school choice platform means making sure that public schools are also an adequate choice. So while I want money to follow the children, I want to give parents the options that my parents didn't have, and hopefully give parents options my parents didn't have so that they can give their children opportunities that my parents had to sacrifice to give me. Sometimes people grow up in an area of the state where there is no charter school, parochial school, private school, homeschool opportunity, and all there is that public school. Or maybe a child is growing up in a home where the parents would not avail themselves of school choice because the parents themselves don't prioritize education. And we certainly have that, which is why I don't want to abandon public education, but I still believe firmly that you can benefit the most children by promoting a kid's first education agenda, which includes giving parents maximum money to go to their children, to that child's education, which is why I'm pro school choice.
How do you balance being pro school choice with building up public schools to be as strong as possible?
So first off, I believe competition will drive some schools to, some schools are going to fail because that's how they're wired. Other schools, I think, for instance, Ellen Weaver, I think needs to be empowered. She needs to have a vote on the State Board of Education. I think the superintendent of education needs to have more power when it comes to taking failing schools into what I call receivership. Have you ever watched the NFL draft? The worst performing teams get the first pick of the best players in the NFL draft. I would like to talk to Ellen and other education leaders in the state, and even maybe this organization, about creating a program where we can incentivize, once a school is like an elementary school is failing, we could have a 3 to 5 year plan where you pay the best teachers to go into those schools and see if they can move the needle on those children. Because at the end of the day, kids whose parents aren't going to send them to another school because they don't prioritize education, or parents who don't have another option because they live in a very rural area, at the end of the day, we have to recognize that those children they have to go somewhere, and we're either going to pay for them on the front end or we're going to pay for them on the back end in incarceration or entitlement programs. So some of the things I'd like to do, obviously, is incentivizing better teachers and taking over school districts that are failing and just gutting the administration and taking over completely. Some of the charter schools like Ben Navarro's school in Charleston took over a failing elementary school about a dozen years ago, and they basically took it in the receivership and turned it into a Meeting Street school. And all of a sudden it began flourishing. And I remember there were members of the NAACP who were boycotting at that time because this was a 95% minority school district. And they saw the school being taken over and they thought it was people coming over to take over their schools. The following year, the NAACP actually endorsed the school because the public school that was failing, that got taken over by Meeting Street Academy, and the other public school that was a couple of blocks away were pulling from the same neighborhood, the same kids from the same neighborhood. And the test scores on the Meeting Street Academy were going up, and the Meeting Street and the other public elementary school were going down. And I asked the principal, to what do you attribute your success in Meeting Street Academy? And how were you able to win over that block of people who didn't believe it? And he says, first off, we demonstrated success by applying the principles of how we govern our schools, and they bought into it. And I thought that was really cool. When I said, what are your principles? He said, all the teachers are at will. We control the curriculum. And there's instead of a 1 to 30 student teacher ratio, there's a 1 to 15 student teacher ratio, meaning there's 2 teachers in every class, a primary and a principal primary teacher, and then a secondary teacher, usually a younger teacher. And he said that has been the secret to our success, and it has worked very well. And those academies are growing. So I would like to see those. I would like to encourage those types of organizations to take over failing public schools as an option to taking them into receivership. That would be my preference, actually, to incentivize, because there's a lot of wealthy families who actually do things like this. And I would like to incentivize that for those failing public schools.
Very interesting strategy. So remember, guys, if you have parental rights and education questions, drop them in. If we don't, we can start doing the other questions too. The first 2 questions actually, I think, relate to parental choice and education issues in a kind of roundabout way. So maybe you can hit that angle as you discuss these, Alan. But Barbara, hey, Barbara, I love Barbara. Hey, Barbara. Barbara wanted to know, who is your choice for Attorney General? Now, the Attorney General, you are the Attorney General right now, and we know as Moms for Liberty how important your role has been for us in the various parental rights fights that we've had in the state. So we're very curious to know, who do you like for Attorney General and why?
But this is not me dodging the question. This is me in a true sense of conflict, because David Stumbo and I grew up together as young prosecutors prosecuting child sex crime cases. He was one of the first Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force prosecutors, and he and I actually worked on a child molestation case together where we put a guy away for 18 years. His wife was our doula, meaning she was in the birth room for the birth of both my son and my daughter. So Vanessa was there with me when my children were born, in the room with the doctor. So I prosecuted and worked with David both as a solicitor when I became Attorney General. David Stumbo was one of my first hires to be a managing prosecutor in the Attorney General's office. So I have a very close relationship with him, and David has been very good to me. I just love him, and I think he is a strong conservative. Stephen Goldfinch is another candidate running for Attorney General who doesn't come from a primary prosecution background, but I actually recruited him into the National Guard as a state judge advocate years ago, and he was one of my lieutenants. And so I served with him in the National Guard, and he was also a state senator. And during that time in the state Senate, anytime I needed funding for going after online predators, anytime I needed funding for expanding our efforts on human trafficking or going after violent criminals, anything law enforcement related, Stephen Goldfinch always was there to either sponsor bills or whip votes for us. And so because of my service with him in the Guard and what he did for me in the Senate, and because of my long tenure of prosecuting cases with David Stumbo, I have not made a public endorsement. I think both candidates are quality individuals. Both candidates, I think, would do a fine job. I would have no problem as your governor working with either one of these gentlemen. I know that does not make your decision any easier, but pragmatically, I'm running for governor for the next 6 days, and I need Goldfinch and Stumbo supporters. So for personal reasons, I can't tell you who to vote for or who I prefer, because I like them both, because I've worked with them both in very different ways. But also, I just trying to stay in my lane. I hope y'all understand that. But I want to give you a little bit of background on how I knew them.
I like that answer because I feel similar in a lot of ways. I think they both have wonderful qualities. And although I have somebody that I think I want to win the most, if the other person wins, I'm going to feel pretty confident with them as our AG of South Carolina.
Do you like Coke or Pepsi?
Sure, they're both great.
Do you like Domino's or Papa John's? You're going to like it either way. You may prefer one to the other, but you're going to enjoy them both.
Okay, so I'm going to skip a little bit ahead because we're going to mix up the question to Kim's question. She just put it through. And then Kathy, I'm going to go to your question next. But Kim wanted to say, Kim asked, can you share some personal information? She said you can even share it on social media, but maybe you could do it here. I think she wants to feel more connected to you as a person. So who are you when you're not wearing the suit of the Attorney General and now the governor?
Okay. This might take me 2 or 3 minutes. Is that okay if I go fast? So I was born in 1973 to my mother and my father, who was a Vietnam veteran. He was an airborne infantry ranger. He decided he wanted to go to flight school and fly helicopters in the Army. They had me when he was in flight school, and then he went to Fort Bragg. And when I was 2 years old, my biological father was killed in a helicopter crash. So my mother came back home to Columbia as a public school teacher in the mid 1970s as a widow at the age of, I think, 26 and with a toddler. And 2 years later, she reconnected with my adopted father, Joe Wilson, for whose name I have now. And he adopted me when I was 4 years old. And I remember being a little boy, 5, 6, 7 years old, and he would come into my room every night and hear my prayers. And I remember him saying, after hearing my prayers, he'd say, Alan, there's a lot of kids in this world that don't have a daddy in their life. You are so blessed that God allowed you to have two daddies that loved you with all of their heart. And so I won the adopted father lottery because that man never let me forget my heritage or where I came from, but he loved me as if he birthed me himself. And I was very blessed. He and my mother had 3 other sons. All 4 of us were Eagle Scouts. All 4 of us are commissioned officers in the military. All 4 of us served overseas. And that's not a brag on me. That's a brag on my parents because they just instilled in us a sense of public service. I'm the only one that ran for office, but all of my brothers have worn the uniform and served in some capacity. Another personal story I could share that I think might be illustrative, and I share this in a lot of my speeches because it's very impactful and important to me. But in 2004, I was a 31-year-old captain serving in Iraq. I was in a field artillery battalion, and I was asked to lead a convoy to pick up supplies on the Iraqi-Turkish border, and it was a 2,600-mile round-trip convoy, and I was the commander. And when we were coming home with our supply, our convoy was attacked twice. The first attack was the one that I'm going to tell you about, and it involved a roadside bomb going off that destroyed the tractor-trailer truck behind me, and it threw my vehicle forward several feet. I remember distinctly when it went off, it was a wave of black smoke and soot came over the hood of the car. Dust filled the inside. It was like day turned to night. It was pitch black in there because it was so smoky. And I remember my ears were ringing. It was hard to hear. I remember people yelling on the radio, and I was like, "Oh my God, are they shooting at us now?" And I began to give orders to secure the area. And as I was giving orders to secure the area, because we were expecting snipers from the rooftops, I look out my front window as the smoke is clearing, and I see a Humvee do a U-turn. That was my lead gunship. They pulled back into the area, climbed onto the tractor-trailer truck that was behind me that had 2 soldiers in it, and it was on fire. And I didn't know it. And they crawled onto a tractor-trailer truck, pulled those soldiers out, and pulled them into their gunship. And then we left the kill zone. No one got shot, thank goodness, but we went about 10 kilometers away. And when I got out of my vehicle, I walked around the back, and I looked at the back of my vehicle, and there were probably several dozen shrapnel holes in the back of my vehicle, some as large as golf balls. And I realized how close I'd come to losing my life. Shrapnel had gone through my vehicle, my Humvee, the commander's vehicle, and through the front windshield, missing me and the other 2 soldiers. We were missed dying by inches. And I tell you that story for 2 reasons. First, one is one of faith. I'd already become a Christian as a high schooler, but that event, when you face a life and death event like that, it causes you to question what's your reason to be here. And I felt like I had a second chance. And I don't want to blow my second chance. And so I've spent my whole life trying to be worthy of surviving that event and trying to be the best version of myself I can be and leave the biggest impact from my family, my community, and my state, which is one of the reasons that drives me to be in public service. So that is the first reason. The second reason I tell you that is when people ask me if I have the courage to do something, I always like to tell them that story and say, when you see a handful of soldiers, 3 soldiers barely out of high school, 20-something, like 20, 21 years old, drive into an area they expected to be shot at, climbed onto a tractor-trailer truck that they expected to explode, which it did 90 seconds after we left. And they did it without any regard for their own safety. To me, that is the benchmark. That is the waterline for me. of course I have the courage. If those kids can do that, then I can have the courage to do what needs to be done. And so that is what motivates me to find courage when I'm afraid to do something. And the final impactful story, and I'll try to do this really fast, maybe a minute and a half. 4 years ago, my wife was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer. And I remember it was right before the first Murdaugh trial. I can say first Murdaugh trial now, unfortunately. I was traveling a lot, and I remember she underwent extensive chemotherapy. She had a double mastectomy, numerous reconstructive surgeries. She developed permanent neuropathy, was sick. Her hair started to fall out. And she came home one day and she said, "Could you shave my head? I don't want our kids to see my hair fall out." So I took her out on the back porch and I took the shears and I shaved her completely bald. And I remember as her blonde hair fell to the ground, I remember looking at my daughter and son's face, and it was shocking that now their mom really does look like a cancer patient. And that was a very scary time because she was talking about whether or not she would watch our daughter get married or our son graduate. And by the way, he graduated high school 3 weeks ago, so that's an accomplishment for us. But she's now cancer-free, and we're very blessed. So we survived that. But I tell you that story for this. When I faced my life and death event, it was a split second. I had time to think about my future. My wife's life and death event was very slow and ongoing for many months, and she had nothing but time and to think about her mortality, but she faced it with such courage. And that event really inspired me on the courage front, but more importantly, it taught me about priorities. I love being your attorney general, and I really want to be your governor, but those are just titles, and rank and wealth and power and fame is not important to me. Priorities are what's really important in life, what is endearing and what is enduring. And to me, what is endearing and enduring is not the title. It's my relationship with my God through my faith, and my relationship with my family, my friends, and my community through community engagement like this, through my relationships. Those are the things that will far outlive any time I spend in government. So that was a little long-winded of an answer, but those are stories I've told ad nauseum over the campaign. And I tell them because I wanted you to have a picture of who I am more than what I will do, because who I am is far more important. So those are just a couple of stories that tell you who I am personally.
Those are beautiful stories. Thank you for sharing that with us. I very much appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
So the other question that I said that I would do next is Kathy's, which is, what is your position on homeschooling?
I fully support it. Like I said, it's one of those menu items on the buffet of choice that there are some kids who flourish, and some of the best kids I've ever met, some of the most well-rounded kids I've ever met were homeschooled kids. And listen, to me, it's all about the best interest of the child. And if a child learns in a homeschool environment, then we need to make sure we support that. If a child learns in a public school, private school, parochial school, or charter school, or some other type of school, that is the schools that it's all about what produces the best, what serves our children and takes care of their interests the best. That's what I'm in favor of. So I'm always going to be pro homeschool.
I'm going to ask my question. So my question is, my kind of litmus test for politicians is, how did you behave during COVID? I see COVID as the biggest infringement on our personal freedoms that we've lived through of our generation. And I think it would be helpful for us to know what you did during COVID when it came to mandates. How did you protect people's freedoms during COVID? And what will you do to ensure that a scenario like that does not happen again in the state of South Carolina?
For those of you who followed it, there were a couple school districts I went to war with in court, actually sued or threatened to sue the University of South Carolina, gave a legal opinion on mask mandates that I was taken to the Supreme Court on. I obviously was involved in federal mandate lawsuits against the OSHA mandate and the federal contractor mandate that were requiring 80, 90 million people to get vaccines. We fought that in court and were successful, by the way. So every single time there was a legal action that I could take that would stop the Biden administration from cramming down some mandate, I was involved with it. So I took a very strong position on defending people. But the other thing I hated is, do y'all remember there were essential businesses that they would allow to be open? I kept thinking to myself, if you're feeding your kids with your business, doesn't that make you essential? But they seem to pick winners and losers, and I would never do that as governor. And I have the benefit of hindsight, but even when we were going through this the first time, I saw other governors and other states. While we weren't as bad as most states, there were some states that did a little better than us, or significantly better than us. And that is very instructive to me as we move forward.
Perfect. Barbara had another question. She said, how did you choose your running mate? So your running mate is Rickenbach. Can you tell people about him? And based on history, we've seen that often the lieutenant governor is at least a candidate for governor. So we would like to know more about him as well.
So thank you. That's a great question. So I started thinking about my lieutenant governor late, like August and into September, and I started to drill down on Mike probably October. And I actually selected him probably in early December, and I announced him in the second week of January. I'll tell you why in a second, but let me give you a little background on him. Mike, for those of you who know Mike, Mike was born to a 14-year-old girl who got pregnant by her boyfriend. Mike, his mother was told by her family, you can't be pregnant in our house. We can't afford you and the baby. So you either have to abort him or abort the baby, or you can put him in foster care. She chose foster care. And Mike bounced around foster care for a little bit and then ended up being adopted. Now he's black and he was adopted by a white family, but he said he was nevertheless a Rickenbaugh. He says there's not a lot of black Germans here, but that's his little joke. But he said he was raised with values, and it was the family values that his parents instilled in him that really kind of drive him today. And he and Sharice got married, and of course in 2008 they opened up a car dealership in Florence, South Carolina, and then the economy crashed. And so not the best time to buy an automobile dealership, but he's not only survived it, they ended up thriving, and through being efficient and innovative. And they were able, within the years after that, were able to open up 2 other car dealerships. So they own 3 car dealerships. Mike is a 20-year state constable with SLED and a DNR game warden. So he has a law enforcement background, that business background I talked about. And what kind of sealed the deal for me is Mike and Sharice and I were sitting in their living room back in early December. And I said, Mike, the lieutenant governor really doesn't have a lot of power to do anything unless it's borrowed power from the governor. And I want to change that. But as it stands right now, you have more power as a senator than you do as a lieutenant governor. And I said, why do you want to come over? And first he told me about the opportunity to serve in the executive branch of government, because he's an executive thinking person. And he really wants to help lead in the transformation of our state. We don't want to be a transitional team. We want to be a transformational team. And he talked about being in the executive branch of government, and the chance to sit with me in the executive branch to really do things for South Carolina was appealing to him. And then I said, okay, if I do pick you, what do you want your issue to be? And I thought he was going to say education, infrastructure, employment, workforce, judicial reform, regulatory tax reform, roads and bridges, or something, right? Those are the big ticket. And they're all important issues. They're all very important. But the answer he gave me is really the answer that kind of hit me like a bolt of lightning. And it's what sealed the deal. When I said, what issue do you want? Mike said, families. And he went on to explain, and I agreed with everything he said, that families are the building block of society. Public safety, education, infrastructure, all that stuff is important and great. We should certainly focus on it. But if the family crumbles, society crumbles. And that's when he told me the story that I already told you. And so I said, Mike, every single issue comes down to the family: education, employment, workforce, tax reform, regulations, energy. I mean, everything, public safety, it's all about the family. And so that is why I picked him. And the reason I picked him when I did, folks, and this is important for you to understand, Mike's name was not on the ballot last Tuesday, and his name will not be on the ballot this coming Tuesday. But I felt like I wanted you to be able to vote for both your governor and your lieutenant governor. And that's why I picked him almost 6 months ago, so that y'all would have 6 months to see him out on the campaign trail, to identify him, to read up on him, to interview him, and to talk to him. And I wanted you, to be able to see what kind of people will Alan Wilson surround himself with when he's the governor. Exhibit A, Mike Rickenbaugh. I've given you Exhibit A, and I gave it to you in January. Number 2, not only do you get to judge me if you think I have good judgment, you get to judge him if you think he's someone you would want him to be lieutenant governor and who is a breath away from being governor. And so that is why I have had him on my ticket. I have not hidden him from you. I'm the only candidate left in this race who has a running mate that you get to identify prior to voting for or against us on Tuesday. And so that's why I picked him.
Thank you so much. I did want to say that I've noticed in the chat, we have 2 state legislators who have joined us, which is awesome. We have Jackie Terabeel on the chat. Jackie. She's our Fort Mill rep and a member of Moms for Liberty, York County. And we also have Sarita Edgerton as well. So thank you both for joining the chat. We very much appreciate that. Somebody said, thank you so much for choosing Rickenbach. That's what sealed the deal for me. And I do want to let everybody know that Rickenbach did speak at the Parental Bill of Rights press conference that Moms for Liberty held in Columbia towards the end of this legislative session. He got up and shared his testimony, and he spoke in favor of the Parental Bill of Rights. So that was really great as well. Okay, I think we probably have time for one more question and then we'll go ahead, or maybe even two, and then we'll let Alan make his closing statements. One big question that has been asked in the chat, but I know it wasn't specifically asked, but I do know that it really matters to people in York County is about Silfab Solar. So as I know you are aware, Silfab Solar is a heavy industrial manufacturing facility that is located in a light industrial zoned spot. I'm sure you've been aware of this as the Attorney General. I know that your office has been involved with it. It's adjacent to two public schools, which is why this issue matters so much to Moms for Liberty. So can you speak to us a little bit about your position on Silfab Solar and what can be done to finally get Silfab out?
So first off, before I talk about Silfab, I just want to give a shout out to Jackie and Sarita, two amazing women serving in the legislature. And I've made a commitment to both of them when it comes to Moms for Liberty and parental rights issues. They will have a front seat with me and will be in my ear constantly because I will be leaning on them to be my Sherpas in the legislature to help us get legislation that you guys are supportive of passed. So I will be working closely with them. So I just wanted to say that if they're on here, I hope they're hearing me. Back to Silfab. So when Silfab came out, first off, we did several things. First off, we sent letters to York County. We sent letters to Silfab. When the first leak came out back in March and DES went up there, we heard that the EPA was going to be down the following week. I called the administrator for the EPA, Lee Zeldin, who's on the president's cabinet. Lee's a friend of mine. I said, Lee, I need you down here ASAP. And I told him why. So they moved up by a week, getting the EPA down there to shut down the operation until everything could be evaluated. Since then, there's a manufacturing process, and then there's a assembly process. And the manufacturing is shut down temporarily. I think it's back up running. The assembly never was shut. They did shut it down temporarily, long enough for the EPA and DES to get in there. I've met with the DES director several times. I know that there's been an audit done by the county, an audit done by DES, and there's a third-party audit being done that is being funded by Silfab. Full disclosure, you can think what you want of that, but that's what I was told. The DES directors told me they have not gotten the other audit done. I have also sent letters to the county and also hired an expert or someone with an expertise in permitting to look over the BZA and all the zoning timelines of who knew what, when, basically I want full transparency on how this happened, that the permitting was allowed for heavy industrial next to a school. We are currently giving all of that information over to our auditor to do a full report that we will publish for all of you. We're still waiting on the audit for DES. A lot of people think that the Attorney General's office has the ability just to kind of like file lawsuits on things we don't like. There has to be a legal hook that allows our office to come in. We're not an environmental regulator. We're not environmental experts. We have to totally rely on state and federal and sometimes even local regulators for it. So I did not have the ability to bring a suit. But what I do have the ability to do is to bring as much transparency as possible. I'm also talking to local legislators, speaking with David Martin, Mike Neese, and others about possibly beefing up the South Carolina Pollution Control Act to give the Attorney General's office more teeth, to have more, not regulatory, but legal oversight over these types of things. That is something that I am willing to, obviously, I would sign as governor. But right now, we have to kind of rely on others to do their job on the regulatory side before we get involved. So right now, we're waiting on the independent audit on the actual science of what's going on over there. We're waiting on our report on the permitting and zoning issues and who is at fault for doing what so that we can give a full accounting to all of you. I expect those to come back sometime later this summer. It could be next month. It could be August. I don't have a timeline for you, but that's what I've done as Attorney General.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I think this question could encompass a lot of the remaining questions about property taxes and DEI and things like that. But what do you feel? And somebody asked a great question. They said, what do you think is your vision for South Carolina as well? And one of the things that you and I were speaking about before the call got started is what you ultimately see the role of governor as being. And I think the Parental Bill of Rights was a great example of this, where I was not aware of any efforts that McMaster made on behalf of getting the bill across the finish line when it stalled out in the Senate. And there's so many other kind of bills that people mention and issues that matter to them. What do you feel like is the role of the governor to shepherd bills through the process before it gets to your desk? Or is that something that you're going to let the legislators kind of handle, and then you're going to address it when it does get to your desk?
So I like Governor McMaster. I respect Governor McMaster. I think he's a genuinely decent human being. He's a gentleman. I don't know any people on either party or in any faction within our party who dislike him. We have very different personalities. We have different leadership styles. I took the role of Attorney General over from him, and I was very different AG than him. So what I'm about to say is not meant to be taken as a criticism of him. It's just to distinguish how I will be different. He liked to let the legislature work out issues. For the most part, there were exceptions, and then he would sign bills that he thought were good policy and veto ones he thought were bad policy. But I think the office of the governor, it was underutilized in advocating for certain things, whether it was judicial reform, parental rights, or whatever. And so as my view is that you use the bully pulpit of the governor's office, because the governor can bring more attention and more sunlight to an issue than any single legislature or group of legislatures or any officials in the state of South Carolina. So as governor, my bully pulpit, my platform will be your bully pulpit and your platform. When there are issues important to families, issues important to businesses, that we need to build broad coalitions of like-minded folks, both in and out of government, and even people within families. Bring them together to bring down, to effectuate the best policies that will bring the most good for the most people in our state. People say the office of governor is weak. I disagree with that. I think the office of governor, it might be weaker relative to the legislature in the Constitution, but the office of governor is only weak if the occupant is weak. The governor has a lot of things that the governor could do, but I don't think the office is being maximized. I do not aspire to be a transitional governor. I want to be a transformational governor. I've been scrolling through some of the questions, and I know we're not going to get to them all, but I'll make this commitment to everyone here. My vision is very broad for the state, and I said this in my closing last night, and I said it in the other debates. My number one goal in everything I do is to make living in our state more affordable for your family, to make our economy more profitable for your businesses, and to make our government more accountable to you. I believe that the family is the building block of society, and the parent-child relationship is sacrosanct and should be defended completely and supported. I believe that the doctor-patient relationship should be defended and supported, and that's why I was against mandates. So those are my views. Those are my values. I tell people all the time, I'm not going to have the answer to every question or the solution to every problem. I view my campaign and I will view my administration as a vehicle for facilitating the best ideas. And sometimes the best ideas about how our state should be run don't come from people in government. It comes from people like you, people out here on the Zoom right now. So what I would invite you to do is, once I win this race, and I believe I will win it, if you want to be part of this movement, then I say, get in the boat and row. There's a seat here right next to me. I want you here. If you guys want me to host a Moms for Liberty, or we can broaden it, you want to do something at the governor's mansion, if you want to host an event in your hometown, you want me to do a traveling roadshow with you guys, I will do whatever it takes to raise awareness to the issues that are important to you. And at the end of the day, I will never forget that this is a job interview, and the office of governor is your office, not my office. I'm just holding it in trust. So I'm here today to say, if you hire me to do this job, I will never forget that you're my boss. And the day that you think I've forgotten that, I would encourage you to throw me out, because I no longer deserve your consideration. So I'm asking everyone for their vote. I'd be honored to have your vote. If you don't vote for me, it can't be because I didn't ask you. And for those of you who felt like I didn't get to a question in that chat room due to time, I'm happy to do another follow-up Zoom or do a follow-up call. And Caitlin, I will deputize you. I'll give you my cell phone here in a second so that you have it. And if you need to connect me with somebody to answer questions on the go, I'm happy to do that as well. But I just appreciate you all giving me this opportunity. And I'm very humbled by the prospect of being your governor.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And I had to laugh when we just dropped this in the chat. Moms for Liberty South Carolina is actually going to go on a traveling roadshow this fall discussing the Parents' Bill of Rights with GOP chapters. So when you actually use the term traveling roadshow. So I got very excited. It seems like we're very much in alignment. You have to take the information to the people.
If I'm the nominee,
yes,
I would love to participate in it.
We would love to have you participate with us. That would be very
participate even if I'm not the nominee. I'm still the Attorney General, but we just got to get on the calendar. And Caitlin, I'll sync up with you here in a little bit with the numbers, but I'm 100% committed to you guys. And like I said, guys, one last statement. I got to jump on a radio call here in 2 minutes. I don't promise to be perfect, and I don't promise I'll never make a mistake or do something that upsets you, because I'm a human being. And if you know my wife, she would say, Alan will upset you at some point. All right. But I do commit to this. I do commit to be accessible to you, accountable to you. and I will never stop fighting for you. And I look forward to working with all of you. So thank you for giving me this great opportunity. It means a lot to me.
Thank you so much. We very much appreciate you coming today. Thank you so much. Jesse says, quarterly Zoom calls with Moms for Liberty. You've got my vote. There you go.
Done.
All right, guys, we are going to take a brief break. Pamela is going to be joining us in about 2 minutes. So everybody just hang on tight and we can ask similar questions to her, of course, or new questions to her. Hi, Pamela. I see you.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. I'm running this sprint just every single day, 24 hours a day, but that's okay. You know us ladies, us moms can do anything. I've
That's
always
right.
said, my husband used to get so annoyed because I'd have so many things on my plate. Somebody would be like, hey, will you be the lacrosse mom? It's us.
Sure.
Will you stop at school in the afternoon and put snacks in all the guys' lockers? Oh, absolutely. I'm like, we just don't know how
Moms
to
get the
say
job
no.
done. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
We appreciate you saying yes to us today and to joining our Zoom call. We have a packed Zoom call with tons of people from across York County and I think even a little bit further. You also have a couple legislators on the call as well. I saw Representative Brandon Guffey pop in. We have Representative Jackie Tarabeel and also Representative Sarita Edgerton with us today. So we thank you guys for joining us. And we just really appreciate your time, Lieutenant Governor, on joining us on the call. So if you are just popping in, the way what we're going to do is I'm going to give her a few minutes just to speak to you about her platform, why she's running, how it relates to parental rights and education issues. And then what we'll do is we'll take questions in the chat. We're going to prioritize questions that relate to parental rights and education issues first, but with our last guest, with Alan, we definitely got to other questions as well. So any questions that you have, go ahead and drop them in the chat. But take it away, introduce yourself, and share more about why you are running to be governor.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for jumping on. I'm Pamela Evett. I've been your lieutenant governor now. This is my 8th year. I've really enjoyed getting to know so many of you, fighting alongside of you. I know I've been to a lot of meetings of Moms for Liberty all across the state, because first and foremost, the best title I've ever held is being a mom. I have 3 children. My daughter will turn 30. My oldest will turn 30 tomorrow, and my youngest is 19. And everything about my kids' world I brought with me, because you can't separate yourself. I'm a business person, I'm a mom, I'm the lieutenant governor, but at the end of the day, you're all one person, and all of your hopes and dreams and things you want to see change for all muddled together. And so a big thing for me starting out, not knowing exactly what fights needed to be fought when I first became lieutenant governor, was school choice. I have basically stood on the Hill for school choice because I think parents should have more options and parents should guide their children's educational outcomes. And I sit with lieutenant governors from all across the country, and that is a really big deal to them. They talk about in their states where they've done full universal school choice that educational success rates just soar. And so it seems, why is this not something we're doing when so many parents want to see the needle moved on education? Also, son being on a college campus was a really weird time after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I started to look around and see, wow, there were a lot of professors out there. We always knew, because my older 2 children would say, Mom, you can't talk about that on campus. Or I remember when President Trump got elected the first time, my daughter was down at College of Charleston and I got her this really cool hat. And she's, oh my gosh, I can never wear that on campus, Mom. And it's just sad. It's sad that kids that have conservative and Christian values don't feel like they can talk on campus. They feel like somehow their voice is stifled because of their professors. And so when I started to see what was happening after Charlie Kirk, what really affected my son, how many 18-year-olds with their 18-year-old friends stop what they're doing and they go to a prayer vigil on a college campus. But Charlie Kirk really touched them and affected them. And I was really proud to get the Turning Point endorsement. But I became angry at this, and I called for the end of tenure on college campuses because I kept hearing this tone of we can't do this or we can't do that. And it's, if tenure is what's stopping you, I didn't understand why we had tenure when I was in college, much less now. But I remember Joe Bustos, I was doing a press conference with the governor on something different, and he brought it up and he said, Lieutenant Governor, don't you feel like professors will somehow be handcuffed on what they could teach or what they could say? And I said, absolutely not. I'm not worried about professors. I'm worried about our kids. I'm worried about these young adults who are only getting one perspective driven into them on a college campus. I said, it is just not right. You can ask kids. I would hope reporters would go to college campus. I've challenged that a few times over the last year and said, why do you not go to a college campus and ask these questions? Because I can tell you from my children, from their friends, from my nieces and nephews, they will all say, I have to write a paper this way. I have to write it in a tone or a tense that I don't really believe in for fear of retribution. And that to me is just fundamentally wrong. And that kind of reared its head again just recently with SC State. And SC State, if you all watched the debate last night, it turned into I can't believe the lieutenant governor was arguing with college students. These are young adults that are about to go out into the world, and I wasn't really arguing with them, but I was standing up for conservative speech. And I believe then what I believe now, and it's probably been the biggest rallying cry I've gotten since in the last, month now? It might be a month and a few weeks. My time's all muddled together, but people saying, thank you for saying you would take away funding. And my dad used to have a great saying. He used to say, you can get to people one of two ways. You can get to them through their heart, or you can get to them through their pocketbook. But you'll get to them one of two ways. And we saw this. Robert Kraft is very philanthropic, gave to a lot of colleges. And when those colleges turned their back on Jewish students and allowed them to be harassed, Robert Kraft asked for his money back. And you know what happened? All those colleges started stopping the protesting and protecting Jewish students. And it's not something I would want to do, but I think everything has to have consequences. And I really believe that if conservative speech is not welcome in any institution, and I know that some of my friends on the other side of the aisle were trying to make it an HBCU issue, it wasn't. It was any institution that doesn't welcome our speech shouldn't welcome our tax dollars either. And I think that's fair. Consequences, we know this as moms, we know this as parents. There always has to be consequences to bad behavior. And I think that is a very fair one that taxpayers embrace. Standing up for medical freedom. I was at a Politics and Pints Post and Courier event that they had a few months back in Charleston. And it was when the spread of measles was happening. And very first question out of the box was, what will you do to ensure that parents are vaccinating their kids? And I'm like, I won't do anything. It is a parent's job to choose what's best for their children. And I was on a panel in Palmetto Bluff. It was a pharmaceutical panel that Morgan Stanley was hosting, and they asked me to be a part of it. And because I was a huge President Trump supporter, the moderator said, Lieutenant Governor, everybody knows you stand with the president, and the president has not been very warm to us. And I turned it around and said, I don't know why. I don't know why you think that. The president just wants people to live longer and be healthy. And isn't that what you all want? We should all be on the same page, right? And everybody's face in the audience kind of dropped because I don't think they were expecting that response. But I said, we have to be clear. The president is giving you an open platform to make the argument that your products are safe. Go make the argument, because parents want to do their research. And government shouldn't be in the business of making your argument for you. Go make it for yourself. Parents are only going to know what they do their research on and they find. And if you don't engage, then that's going to be really bad. And so I think those are things on more the mother side, the education, the making sure government doesn't try to pretend that they love your children more than you do. And I think this is a trend that was happening where they were trying to push parents away. And the governor a few years ago in his State of the State said, we need more parents involved in the classroom and not less parent involvement in the classroom. And we've seen it from Meeting Street Academy. Educational success increases. I said it last night in the debate, when parents are more involved. And so from a parental side, I want that kind of common sense. I want somebody who will really fight for these issues, that won't back down when the fight gets tough. And I took the arrows on that, and I was proud too on a couple of those issues that I believe are important to everybody that's on this call. On a totally different business side, I'm not a career politician. I spent my entire life in business. I'm an accountant by trade. I'm a business owner at heart. I started a business from an office in my house. I grew it into a national company. I know what it takes to get things done. I've worked really hard with the General Assembly. I've made friends with a great many of them. I hope I've earned their respect. I know many of them have earned mine because it is really important. This is a very legislative state. That's not news, a news flash to anybody. So a governor being able to work with the General Assembly is definitely a plus, but also being able to bring them to the table and say, listen, maybe we don't agree on this. Maybe I'm here, you're here. How do we work together to get things done? I think that's the right way. I think so many people get so weary when they turn on the TV in DC and you just see all this fighting and nothing getting done and no policy getting pushed. I think there's a time to be able to work together. There's sometimes you're just going to have to agree to disagree. But I think a very good business common sense approach is what it takes. I think moms, families, everybody in between, our seniors, they want to see more money coming into their own homes. And that's why I think that we have to finish the job that the governor and I have started with the General Assembly to eliminate income tax. Other states have done it. It's not like it's something that is such a mountain it can't be overcome. We're going to have to rein in spending to do that. We're going to have to lean in on technology because our technology is antiquated. And if you want to stop bloating government with more bureaucrats, then bring in technology and let it start helping you work smarter, not harder. And that's when you really find things. I started, my company was a payroll HR company, and we really turned into a tech company by the end because I had more programmers in my office than I did payroll inputters because technology is the way if you want to work efficiently. And so bringing that fresh business perspective is important. And for us to be able to do as government, we need to do that efficiency really matters. And that's why I worked with businesses all over the country. It's not just South Carolina, but I'm very focused on getting rid of useless regulations. There are a lot of regulations we need. There are some we don't. A lot of them we don't. So I would love to sunset all of our regulations and bring them back up and weed out what's old and outdated and keep what we need, but make sure that they're not written so broad that bureaucrats are having to interpret and then everybody's putting their own spin on it. Because most of the calls I get revolve around I called and this person said one thing and then the next person said another thing. And then when you call the director of a department, they're like, because there's too much room for interpretation. And I think that's something we really have to focus on because predictability is key when you're a business owner. And then judges. Dear Lord, judges end up being a huge issue. I've traveled all 46 counties from July to December. I've done it many times, but from July to December, I did it just to hear everybody speak. And when I came up to York, I was shocked to hear, I'd heard and read some of the articles on CILFAB. I actually sat down with a group up there to hear more in depth what was going on. As a parent, it is really scary and it should have gotten more attention. And I haven't been into the weeds. I was hearing it from one perspective. I hear it from another, but we have been really working with that group from the governor's office now to find out how we help or get somebody to help them with the fears that they have. And I think we're making some good inroads to connecting them in DC with the FDA because that ends up being like where they need to be. So, but it was like, as a mom, I could understand exactly what those parents were going through. But what it gave me traveling to all 46 counties is this perspective of where do you want to see your county? What do you want? Who do you want your neighbor to be in that county? What are you looking for? What do you need? And 3 years ago, I realized that the state didn't have a blueprint on growth. Every county did, the state doesn't. That'll be changed with me as your governor because it's that kind of business-minded approach to government that what it does is it makes it so that we kind of know where to push resources to. Now, Department of Transportation will be a cabinet under the governor. That's important. Judges, where I was going to, and I got sidetracked on all the people, but that's something everybody talked about. They want to change the way our judges are elected. Everybody needs to feel like justice is delivered fairly. And so when you talk about, in my platform, this isn't something really new for me. This is something the governor and I have talked about for years now while we were in office, is how the governor should appoint and the General Assembly should confirm. And it should be based on basically a criteria. Are you the best person suited for this very powerful job? Being on the bench comes a lot of power comes with. I want to make sure they're the best candidates that we can get. I want to make sure it's term limited because it is a lot of power for somebody to hold on to for far too long. And then you have to make sure we have a review process because if a judge falls off the tracks and not doing his job, we need a way to pull him back or remove him if that's what it takes. So I believe that's important. But I believe with that change will come a lot of power. And last night, the debate, we talked about it. There were people in the General Assembly that came to me. I didn't know this because I didn't get a phone call. But when James Smith came up to be elected as a judge, Alan Wilson was calling people in the House and asking them to vote for him. James Smith was the Democrat that ran against the governor and I in our first election. He was endorsed by Planned Parenthood. And if you go back to his stuff, he said he would be a friend to the LGBTQ community. As a conservative, that is not somebody I would want sitting on the bench. I want somebody that's rooted in the Constitution. And we are all struggling to get more conservative judges. We've seen everywhere. We've seen what's happened to President Trump. We've seen what's happened all over the country. And so with that will come a lot of power to the governor. So it becomes critical. And I was really disappointed when he said all those legislators were lying. That's now between him and the legislators that have stepped out or the ones he's made the call to, and they can handle that between themselves. But that is really important because my dad used to say, don't tell me who you are, show me who you are. And that to me shows people something. I know I've talked a lot and you can go to PamelaEvitt.com. I have a whole lot of other things and I have policy broken down and things that I feel really passionately about, but I know you have questions and probably limited time.
No, that was great. You actually, I think you hit so many questions that I know people want to ask. So maybe we can dig more into certain topics like you addressed SILFAB, which of course is a very important issue for us in York County because they are adjacent to two schools. And you talked a little bit about school choice. So maybe that's a good place for us to start with school choice. I think that most people who are in Moms for Liberty or support the Moms for Liberty mission agree that school choice is the way to go. But I also think that probably contrary to the way a lot of people think about Moms for Liberty, Moms for Liberty also is really focused on ensuring that we have strong public schools at the same time, right? Just because you want school choice doesn't mean that you want weaker public schools. Public schools, the foundation of our communities. It's often the way that children are lifted out of poverty through great public education. And it's something that all of us are pouring our tax dollars into. And we want public schools to be as strong as possible while also giving parents school choice when those options are a better fit for their kids. So do you agree with that assessment? And can you talk to the push-pull of, do you want the money to follow the child? How do you create stronger public schools? If money is following children who opt out of the public education system, how do you balance that? Because I do think that sometimes conservatives get a bad rap for that. When people think of it in a very black and white fashion, and it's not. So can you speak to that issue?
Absolutely. So I've always said, if you live in a great district, and there are a lot of people, that's what I heard from the parents when I met with the SILFAB group. They moved there specifically because that school is such an amazing school district and they put everything on the line and they've invested in their homes and now they feel rather trapped, which is heartbreaking. But if you're in a great district, then I guess just the ability for parents to have other choices pushes you to make your public school district better. And in areas that can't do that, they said, I always hear this argument for 8 years now that, oh, it's going to be our rural areas that suffer. But that's not true. Our rural areas suffer now because parents don't have those choices. And when a charter school or a private school can go into that area, then one of two things happen. Parents now have an option to give their children a better education that's not guided by their zip code, or the public school has to up their game. And all these things we fight, I tried to explain this one day. I was speaking at a group and I said, and the legislators that are online get it. By the time my child would come home and tell me something was happening in school, right? They were preaching transgender or preaching whatever the latest fad is that somebody would be talking about. By the time my daughter would probably tell me that day because she'd find it weird. My boys may never tell me because nothing happens in school, right? They didn't learn anything, they got no homework, whatever. But by the time I would find that out and would go to the school and then go to the school board and then get no help there, then you go to your legislator and then they got to take it down to Columbia and then it has to go through all the committees, has to go to full floor. You see where I'm going with this. It takes so much time to do it that way, to try to get something passed that will help parents who aren't happy. But if you had universal school choice, you wouldn't have to do that. And schools would have to stick tighter to what they need to be doing is teaching these kids and keeping their personal opinions out of the classroom. And I really am starting to feel like I sound old, like my parents. Oh, the good old days, right? I never knew when I was in school if my teachers were married, if they had kids, if they had a dog, if they were a cat person, because they didn't talk about personal things. They just taught. And I think to me, that's what we should be going back to. And I think that's what universal school choice does with a voucher. It kind of reins everybody in and makes the lines less blurry. This is our mission. This is what we're here for. Because that's how private schools operate, right? My children went to parochial school because I wanted them, the values we were teaching, to be reinstilled in them at school. And it was hard in the beginning. I was starting my business. We didn't have a lot of extra money. So we made sacrifices. But yeah, like you brought up, I was still paying in through my tax dollars to the public school. So I just think you can have both. Competition will make public schools better, and parents will feel empowered to send their children to schools that they align with if schools are doing something that they're not aligned with.
Yes. Yes. I think that's funny that you said that makes you feel old to have that thought, because I actually think in a recent Moms for Liberty Executive Committee session, we had the exact same discussion. And I understand exactly what you're saying. Okay, so one of the questions that we asked Alan Wilson when he was on is we asked him about what was he doing during COVID to protect our freedoms. And of course, there were so many challenges during COVID for parents. There were challenges for people who are employees of big corporations. There were pressures on small businesses with mask mandates. So you were the lieutenant governor at the time. So can you please refresh everybody's memory on what you were doing during COVID, especially as it relates to education issues?
Absolutely. I kind of looked, that was like such a trying time. I had just gotten into office. So imagine going from the business sphere and then hitting into all this. But I do try to emphasize, now that we look in the rearview mirror, I think there's a lot of things that we could say, okay, we could do different. But at the time, if we compare ourselves to other states, we were the last state east of Mississippi to tap on the brakes. We were the first state to completely open up. We never shuttered down again at all. The governor stood up he said, I'm the commander in chief here. And so the SC National Guard, he never mandated vaccines for them. He tried to make sure that kids were being unmasked because he didn't feel it was right. When it came to private business, he never put in a lot of those mandates were voluntary that were coming in from private businesses like restaurants and things like that, because they wanted to get people back out. And so they were doing whatever they could. The COVID, Dr. Traxler, those kind of things came up last night. Dr. Traxler would never have a place in my administration. Neither would have Dr. Simmer, because I know that nobody has confidence in with them. And when you have a public health director, the people of your state have to have confidence in that person. And I think that's really important to remember. And so that is a big deal for me.
Thank you for sharing that about Dr. Traxler. Do you have somebody in mind that you would like to tap for that position when you are elected governor?
You know what I would do is a nationwide search for the best person. And I think that's what we have to do right now. But it's funny, like everybody is talking about, nobody would take that director's position right now with the governor or the next governor looming. Who would take a job to possibly not have a job in less than or 6 months? But what I would want to do is stake out a nationwide search and get the best people. Being a business person, that's kind of where I lead with on everything. We should always be looking to bring the best and brightest in. If we're going to make real substantive change, then we have to really look for the best people. And I've said, like somebody had asked me a couple of weeks ago, they said the governor's position in South Carolina isn't really weak, but is rather weak, but how could you bolster it up? And I think you bolster it up like in your boards and commissions, in your appointees, by going out there and getting the best and the brightest, by bringing people from the private sector in. There's a lot of people like myself who have already made their mark in business, and now they look to say, how do I take what I learn and craft change that is more effective? And so I think there's a lot of people out there that would do that. I'm not doing this for the money. This is, if you're doing a servant's job, you're not doing it for the money. That's why the governor and I have never accepted a pay raise. The General Assembly has offered it in the past. We had asked them to write us out of it because we knew what these jobs paid when we took them. And it wasn't about like making more money while we were in. We were going in to make critical change. And that's how I approached my position. That's how I will continue to approach my position. I had a question today that said, there is a pay raise that's about to happen for the next governor. And I said, I won't take it. I'm fine. When I threw my hat in the ring to be governor, it was a $109,000 a year position. And that's what I went into it knowing full well that. But that's kind of where I stand on that. I think bringing the best and brightest in is the best way to do it. And if we have to reach out to the private sector, we absolutely should, because there's so much talent there. And I think if they knew that they had a business-minded governor, they'd be willing to cross over.
Wonderful. Now, we also actually have we have legislators on this call too, which is great. Again, thank you guys for joining. We also have seen multiple school board trustees pop in the call, and one of our school board trustees just asked a great question. Joe, I'm going to get to your question next, but what you just said about hiring the best of the brightest is a perfect segue for something else that somebody else asked. I'm going to ask that question first, which is, who is going to be your lieutenant governor?
Oh my goodness. So I said last night, it has been so funny, the speculation. I laugh. Like if you and I are having this conversation, it was just you and I, there would be a news article somewhere that you were going to be my lieutenant governor. I
would personally be a great lieutenant governor.
I bet you would. And you know what? I have really concentrated on getting people to know me. And I think I said this to somebody a while back. I'm like, since the beginning of this republic, the president gets through the primary and then he nominates his vice president, and that's worked forever. I didn't think it would be this big of an issue, but I have always concentrated. I've always said I wanted to get through the primary, and then I would concentrate, kind of like I just said about electing department heads and board members. And then I can sit down and I want somebody that is a rock hard conservative. I want somebody who is really in the trenches with what people want here in South Carolina. And I don't mean like a blow it up, burn it down, but somebody like myself who you don't have to stand and beat your chest. You just do what's right. Yeah. I want somebody that has a solid business acumen, that understands business, because the business of government should be business when you're in the executive branch.
Absolutely. Do you have a short list of people that you're considering?
So, last night in the news gaggle, I said, to make everybody happy, I had some people in my mind that I haven't vetted. I think it would be reckless to throw names out. So I'm going to throw the whole list of people that in my mind, I'm like, I think this person would be a good job. I'll win the primary, and then we'll go and do all the background research on them to make sure that what I see is what I'm getting, because I think that's really important. And we'll go through an interview process, but at least kind of like what the president did when he was looking at his Supreme Court picks, and everybody was like, oh, you're going to have all these Supreme Court picks. Who would it be? And he said, I'm going to give you a list, and from this list, I'll find a great candidate. And so that's what we're going to do. And I hope that makes everybody feel better, that it's going to be somebody that I can work with every day, that can work with the General Assembly, that can be boots on the ground like I have for 8 years, to hear what's important to people.
Okay. So now I'm going to go back to our school board trustee, Joe Helms's question. This is a great question. Joe is a wonderful father of many children. He's a great conservative on the board. And this is a great question because we actually have a very unique school district in this part of York County, in the sense that we are a very high performing school district when it comes to test scores and things of that nature. So his question is, you say that public schools must up their game. That is what we have done. The Formel School District is 91st in the nation, but that has come to a huge cost to our tax base. 35.5% of our funding comes from the state. Why is it that the best district gets a small portion of funding? Compare that to 5 to 6 years ago, where funding from the state was about 60%. Should high performing districts receive less funding from the state?
That is a great question, Joan. I've sat down with Ben Navarro, and Ben Navarro, for I don't know how many, he's in Charleston, he's a big developer, but he started Meeting Street Academy. And I think it's a lot of the roadblocks that the bureaucracy of government puts into place. Ben Navarro actually started a fund that was going to be statewide and got private dollars to come into it to reward teachers that surpassed the outcome. But it took him years to get the approval to do that. What we have to do is we have to do what you do in business, start rewarding good performance. And that's something that it's going to take everybody to come together to do. Ellen Weaver, Superintendent of Education, sitting down with leadership in the House and Senate and sitting with the governor to say, hey, how do we work this to where districts that are really high performing get a bigger stake to keep moving on and continue improving? I think for so long, that's been the frustration that I've heard boots on the ground from South Carolinians, is that if you look at the price per student, the worst performing areas have the highest cost per student, and instead of the other way around. And you get the concept, right? If they're struggling, you're trying to help them get better. What the governor and I felt very strong about is teacher pay, and how do you get good teachers into the classroom? That makes all the difference. And when I first became lieutenant governor, Mick Zase came into my office. He had this big binder. He was the superintendent of education at one time, and he was working under Betsy DeVos under the first Trump administration. And he said to me, he said, Lieutenant Governor, don't let the bureaucrats fool you. Poor kids can learn. It's a good teacher in the classroom that makes all the difference. And that's when the governor and we completed 2 major campaign promises when it came to teachers and schools. The first one is we had the lowest starting teacher salary in the Southeast. So what does that tell you? If you're a young teacher coming out of school and like where you are, very close to Charlotte, you didn't cross the line over to North Carolina, why would they stay in South Carolina if they could earn more money driving 45 minutes away? So we made a promise to the people of South Carolina that by the time we left office, that we would at least have our teacher starting salaries at $50,000 a year. I think they were making $33,500 when we came in, or it might have been $35,800. It's going to be one of those two numbers, but dismal. And the second campaign promise we made, is that we would put an armed trained school resource officer in every school in South Carolina, because teachers want to be safe, parents want their kids to be safe, and we felt that was a thing to do. And we worked really well with members of the General Assembly. Every single year we put it in our executive budget. They rallied along with it. Last year, a year ahead of schedule with us leaving office, we have an armed trained school resource officer in every school. This year, again, working with the General Assembly, we'll be leaving office, completing that second major campaign promise, that our starting teacher salaries here in South Carolina would start at $50,500. And look at the leap. We are now, today, before the $50,005, our starting teacher salary base is more than North Carolina or Georgia. What a leap. And that's how we start helping some of those communities. I always believe, as a business person, fundamentally, money should only be a bridge to a solution, but it's never the solution. And so the solution is getting good teachers, giving them the passion to stay and teach right here in our state, and then putting them in districts that really need them, encouraging them to go. And that comes with trying to build up communities too, so that young teachers, I've heard over and over from them, they're very gung-ho. My niece is a teacher. She's been teaching 3 years, and she went to a Title I school district. But once she got there, like there was hard for her to find a place to live, and it was hard for her to find, there wasn't a grocery store close by. She was driving to get everywhere. So I think building up districts or building up those areas, that some of those rural areas, becomes key to really attracting those teachers. It all builds together, right? There's not one silver bullet that fixes everything, but it's having a true vision that ties it all in.
Absolutely. Your team texted me that you have to move on to the next activity.
Oh,
So I'm gonna let you make your final pitch, but I do want to just really quickly give a voice to one of the comments in the chat. I think
sure.
one common misperception about Moms for Liberty is that, or I think people probably don't realize that we actually have a lot of conservative teachers who are very involved in our organization. Actually, about 50% of our executive team in York County are either educators, current or past. And we have a teacher in the chat. She said, I think it's great to reward teachers who perform well, but I'm a Spanish teacher in a Title I rural school. I'll never benefit from a reward since I'm not a core content teacher. She said, just keep in mind the idea that we have to also reward teachers like her for excellent behavior. It's her 26th year of teaching English or Spanish.
I think that's great, but I think Ben Navarro is looking at outcomes, not just in core principles, to teachers that actually excel in outcomes at the end of every year. And it was a great program. And finally, Ellen Weaver was able to figure out how to get behind it. And I think this was the second year that they have done that. I think when you get broad thinking people, successful people, they get all the different pieces, but there's always room for improvement with these things, right? You don't want to give up good for great and do nothing. So I think a perspective is always good, and that's why it's important to have everybody's input. But no, she's absolutely right. I think every teacher in the classroom makes a big impact. I know when my children and me, I can remember Mrs. Davis, my third grade teacher. Everybody has that story about that one teacher that kind of turns it all around for them.
Thank you so much. I completely agree with you. Great teachers are everything. We appreciate them so much. So if you want to go ahead and make your closing remarks, go for it.
Oh, thank you. First of all, again, thank you all for jumping on. I believe that for 8 years, you have seen me working all around the state, trying to get things done, trying to take a stance on things that I feel really passionate about. I'm running to be the 118th governor of this great state. I want to bring that same passion to the governor's office. I want to have an open door policy where everybody gets a seat at the table. Whether I agree with a piece of policy or not, I think we're better when we keep talking. Charlie Kirk, that was one of the things that I think I took away from his message. I don't know that I could tell you every message he had, but that when we stop talking, that's when bad things start happening. And that's why I think it's important to stay in touch and stay connected. But we also have to make sure somebody has the ability to do the job. And I think looking at the resume between me and my opponent is critical. Don't listen to what we're saying, listen to what we've done. Look at our records and look at our experience. I was a successful CEO in the private sector. I've been sitting at the right hand of the governor now for 8 years. I know where the state needs to go. I have the relationships to get us there. And I have connections in the private sector to make sure we bring the best and brightest in. Whether they donated to my campaign or not is irrelevant. I think we look for the best and brightest. When we're looking for directors, we look nationwide and we get the best. And hey, it's not hard to sell South Carolina. Everybody in the country is trying to move here. But I would just be honored to have your vote. There's only 2 of us now. I think the contrast is there. Business person, career politician. If you want change, then you vote for change. If you want the same old thing, and I think you need fresh perspectives to come in and really change things along with the know-how to get it done. And that's what I bring to the table. If you voted for somebody else in the primary, I'd be honored for you to be on the team now. I think we're going to do great things together. We're going to make South Carolina even better than it is today, and that should always be the goal. Early voting begins today. It's today and tomorrow and then Tuesday. So please get out and vote. I'd be honored to have your vote, and I'd be honored to work with all of you to keep making sure that we put children and education and parents first.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor. We very much appreciate your time, and I wish you the best of luck over the next, what is it, six days?
I think.
Yes, and thank you so much for serving our great state in the capacity that you have and being such a fabulous representation for the state of South Carolina. We appreciate you very much.
Thank you. It really is an honor to serve.
Thank you. All right, everybody, thank you for joining the Zoom call, and we'll see you next time.